Hello everyone, Mike Levin here, Monday, May 11th, around 7:50 a.m. Heading into the office early, and I'm walking here along Broadway. Took the A in to get a seat on the train, and this walk and others like it every morning are reminding me of this theme that keeps popping into my head that explains a lot about life, which is 7 billion. It's a really big number. There's about 8 million of those people just here, I believe, on Manhattan alone, if not that Manhattan plus the outer boroughs. And 8 million is a large enough number, but 7 billion in the world is staggering. And of course, it got a lot larger just during my lifetime. I remember it being measured, I believe, in like 4 billion when I was a kid. And I've seen it go through 5, 6, 7. So I'll have seen a population doubling probably just within my lifetime, at least as far as statistics go. And I've also gone through feeling like the world has become a lot larger. You feel the presence of more people because, of course, of the internet. Before the internet and the web, there were these, I guess, handful of celebrities, people that everyone knew because they got out over the limited, finite resources of broadcast television, the airwaves, and to a lesser degree the newspapers, which are also a fairly limited information channel resource. Because before the internet, when you wanted to get a message out to a lot of people, you had to go through such channels as broadcasting over the air, usually from these tower nodes, maybe bounced up off of a satellite, but then rebroadcast at local receiving units all over the country and to a lesser degree all over the world. So a message could get broadcast to all of the United States, but barely outside its borders at all. And only a few people could do that, and they could do it over and over and over. And you know, that's the 50s. That's the world that, you know, I guess Leave It to Beaver and all those, you know, post-World War II television programs drew, the picture they drew of the United States because of, you know, the post-World War II economy, surplus, the GI Bill, the interstate highway system, everything that started in the New Deal that was extended even much beyond that after the war was over. And that's the world that many of us knew, hand in hand with very limited information channels. So everyone knew the same thing, and there was a lot of money to spend. Enter the internet. Mid to late 90s. People start realizing that this thing that's really been around since the 70s or the 80s could be used for much more than just email and news groups, and the limited ways in which the first extension of the ARPANET to the internet was actually used. I was on the Commodore VAX back in those days, the CVM VAX, which could, you know, which used the internet to route messages around. And it was a nice experience, very geeky, saw things like IRC for the first time. But also I was doing dial-up. I was doing dial-up to the local bulletin board, usually the Millennium Falcon. Shout out to Joe Malika, if you're still around, and Tony Antonuccio's POG board I dialed into a lot for Philadelphia Amiga Users Group. And I was starting to experiment with FidoNet, which was a cobbled together alternative to the internet that relayed messages out amongst local BBSs as nodes, just as if they were routers. And wow, when the internet proper arrived and dial-up became broadband, and things like YouTube were no longer such radical exceptions, but now became something of the norm. Constant streaming of high bandwidth stuff, expectations get recalibrated. Netflix is on the scene. Napster is making music sharing and pirating more fun and easy than ever before in history. And Apple and Steve Jobs are formulating their iTunes tight ecosystem answer to that problem. And it's the most wild of the Wild West days of the web. And here we are 25 years later, I suppose. I remember the 25th anniversary of the World Wide Web, which really turned the excessively geeky internet into the only mildly geeky World Wide Web. And you hear the names thrown around like Vint Cerf and Tim Berners-Lee, and the way they all fit into this picture and difference between the internet and the web. Well, the way to think about it is that this networking protocol just made the internet possible. It's called TCP/IP, and just go with it. You know, there's deeper explanations about how this allows communication to route its way around blackout spots, say during a nuclear blast, when, you know, messages still have to get through and they have to now be able to robustly route themselves around blackout zones. So that's the internet, and that's TCP/IP, and that is Vint Cerf, one of the people on the team who actually did the research and you know, the innovations that led to it. He wasn't single-handedly, I believe it was once again the team at Xerox that was a primary contributor here, as well as always Bell Labs. And the ARPANET came into existence for the government, and then the internet came into existence because it was privatized, or at least turned over to universities. And yeah, that's when I got in on it on the CBM VAX original point, like going back here. Oh yeah, the billions of people. Well, that is the internet side of it. Then the web side of it comes along with, you know, early primitive and sometimes competing web browser standards, different graphical user interfaces to the internet. And this is when programs like Gopher were the primary user clients, interfaces to the internet. So these graphical point and clicking AOL style interfaces on the internet were something of a big deal. And that's where the other name, Tim Berners-Lee, comes into the picture, because he defined the HTTP protocol, which sits on top of the TCP/IP protocol. So the web protocol sits on top of the internet protocol. The internet is lower down in the stack and means much more generic things when it comes to communication. The web and HTTP means much higher level things, like suggesting the presentation and formatting of a document so that it can have embedded hyperlinks. And that's the hypertext transfer protocol, so that by clicking on these links, you could surf or jump around from document to document. At this time, things like Apple's, HyperCard, right? That was one back then. Amiga had Amiga Vision, and there were a bunch more on the Amiga platform, like Pandu. Any one of these could really have become the standard, as well as AOL's graphical user interface, but it wasn't. It was the web. Netscape jumped on the bandwagon, made a great, implementation of the HTTP browsing protocol started making extensions. It became highly useful. Organizations had to spring up around it to ensure standards, or at least make a noble attempt at standards. These were really the Wild West days. And then suddenly, people could broadcast information to the world, right? The web, and then some video streaming technologies on top of that made it possible. And then the short data formats like Twitter to take, counter anti-pattern approaches to communication. So you've got simulating broadcast with things like YouTube, which are actually much cooler point-to-point than broadcast. Broadcast is quite boring in comparison to point-to-point streaming. More communication channels were possible, both in the old traditional broadcast-looking sense and this newer, hyper, efficient, tiny, concentrated, pure text, anti-pattern form that became Twitter and I suppose blogging and stuff, self-publishing, and suddenly you can feel the 7 billion people in this world, with only 1 billion of them being online. Maybe it's 2 billion, but you get the point. Lots of people is starting to feel like lots of people because of the internet and the web. And being 25 years into the internet, and maybe some 35 or 40 years, 25 years into the web and 35 or 45 years into the internet, at least that's how far back Unix goes, because Unix is as old as I am, 1970, born the same year. And you've got the communication explosion. Infinite channels, as good as infinite audience, infinite niches and subject matter and interests and creative outlets and tolerance for work in progress versus finished product. And it all becomes very, very interesting. And that's where I'm starting to focus my effort now on what does it mean to be found in that world. You type in some keywords, you ask something a question, it has to make an editorial choice by scanning through and applying algorithms to all the information it knows, and decision trees and feedback loops of quality that it has, so that it naturally evolves to genuinely the best relevant answers. It certainly seems to be what Google is going for. And so my job is to massage the potential subjects of these searches just so that on average it is found and seen as quality and self-improving and always put forth as a editorial choice for consideration for a broad diversity of related subject matter words. Thanks for joining me. Hope to see you again soon, and don't forget to subscribe.